Father, you've created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, Lord. I praise you, Father. My frame was not hidden from you. When I was made in the secret place, woven together in the depths of the earth, you looked.
Welcome to this week's episode of Understanding the Application of Prayer. We rule in this life through prayer. And there's a lot of people that are struggling with unanswered prayer, and yet Ephesians 6 verse 10 says that we are to pray in all manner of prayer. Praying always in all manner of prayer. So that's actually an indication that there are different kinds of prayer. And that is so important that we actually understand the tools of prayer to have success in prayer. So I would just like to discuss some of the tools of prayer today, because no battle is won in the physical realm before it is won in the spiritual realm. To apply, it's like a general going to war. He has a battle plan. Sometimes he would send in the Air Force before he sends in the foot soldiers. He has a specific plan and a strategy. And I think that is the thing that we need to understand. Pastor Jamie Winship mentioned something. He says that in every situation in life, we need to ask God, what do I need to know about this situation? And what do I need to do about this situation? So today is actually looking at Ephesians 6 and talking about the fact that what is the different manners of prayer? First of all, I'd like to speak about supplication. So supplication is the cry of our heart as his children. The book of Exodus says, and Israel cried to the Lord, and he heard their oppression, and God reacted on that. Psalm 34 says, the righteous cry, and God hears them. And there are circumstances in our lives that we hardly don't have words. We're in a place of total shock and an absolute place of survival, and all we can think of is to prostrate ourselves before God and cry out. And I want to encourage to say that God does hear the cry of our hearts. But I'm talking about effective prayer today. So the next thing mentioned in that Ephesians 6 speaks about petitions. Petitioning in the Spirit in prayer actually means like a legal document. It is based on the legality of the word in the spiritual realm. And it needs to be sometimes written out and signed and sealed with communion. It is a very effective tool in prayer. And then what are all the other manners of prayer? There's praying in the Spirit, which is incredibly effective. And I sometimes feel I want to tell all prayer warriors to push in praying in the Spirit. Because after a while, there is a download that comes of words of knowledge or words of wisdom, as I can put it, keys to unlock doors in the spiritual realm. That is so important when we push through. Most of the times we say, Lord, help about this. Lord, will you do that? But we actually instructing God what to do instead of waiting on God. There's a great difference, like I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, in approaching God contractionally and saying, Lord, I want this and I want that, instead of waiting on God, waiting for the counsel of God, and say, Lord, what do I need to apply this? When the disciples in the book of Matthew, brought the demon-possessed man that threw himself in the fire and in water to Jesus and said, Jesus, we couldn't deliver him, Jesus actually gave them a key, and he said, this kind only goes out through prayer and fasting. So there is also the combined strength of prayer and fasting that shifts in the heavenlies. Then the thing which I find the most important tool in prayer is praying the word instead of my own emotions and my own thoughts about it. Psalm 103 says, bless the Lord, you angels, who obey the voice of your power. So what do we need to do in prayer? We need to give a voice to the word of God and speaking it out. Life and death is in the power of our words. We actually impact the heavenlies and the frequencies around us by speaking out. And how effective the word of God, because the word of God will never return void. And we know in Ephesians 6 that that is actually our not only our defensive weapon, but also our defense. So I want to encourage everybody to wait on God and receive a word from God. And then in the Old Testament, in the Book of Kings, they had when they had warfare strategies, actually invading enclosed and walled cities, they would use battle rams. These were thick, wooden-shaped ram heads that they would batter against the wall day and night, until the resistance broke through with 1 or 2, 3 stones, and then the army would enter the city that way. And so in the spirit, sometimes we need that persistence in taking up a specific word and continually batter ramming that stronghold in our lives, and to continue with that. The thing is that we become discouraged and we think God has not heard us, has not heard me, this is not working. But you cannot measure. You cannot measure what is going on in the spirit. You don't know what you're up against in the spirit. That's why praying in the spirit is so important, because we can't actually see what's going on in the spiritual realm. But do you know that the heavenlies operate on the voice of his power? So every time I speak the word, angels actually takes that word and they work with it. Or the forces of darkness takes the word and the word. And I think we are really living in a time that I want to encourage the body of God to apply tools in prayer, specific tools. Find that battle strategy for your specific problem and start applying that with patience and endurance and faithfulness. And I want to encourage every viewer, we are never powerless in this life. Never. God has never left us powerless. As long as there's a God in heaven, there's grace on earth. Wait on God about your prayer strategy.